My husband Gregory, who you may know as Gregg Allman of the Allman Brothers Band, was diagnosed with cancer in the spring of 2012, but it wasn't until about 2016 that it was progressing enough that the outside world could see what was going on. And he had a lot of regrets about how he had pushed some people away when he started getting sick because he didn't want people to see how sick he was or the routines that he had to do to stay well and functioning. And I've heard that there are people who were shocked when he died because they didn't know how sick he was or what happened at the end. So I'd like to share a little bit of that insight. He wanted people to know how hard he fought to stay alive. He wanted people to know how hard he fought to keep playing music. For any of you who saw him at those last shows like Red Rocks, that was wild and nearly impossible that he was able to do that at that stage of his life, but he hated disappointing y'all and he loved to play music. And as a preface to this and anything else that I share publicly, when he got sick, he said, don't you think you want to record some of these conversations we're having? Don't you think I've learned a thing or two in this life that one day you're going to want to look back and hear for yourself or share? And so I have hours and hours of lengthy conversations that I recorded of us talking about life and death and what life for me would be like when he was in the next realm. So anybody who feels any kind of discomfort about anything I share personally of his, he and I have already spoken at length about it. And thank you for having his best interest at heart. So Gregory had a tumor in his lung that had metastasized from liver cancer that he had had previously. And there's a nerve that runs like this, and the tumor started pressing against that nerve, which paralyzed his vocal cords, of all people. And so the vocal cords are like these two flaps that come together, and they either close and they push out the sound of your voice through your mouth, or they close and they push your food particles down into your stomach instead of your lungs. And so before we knew this was happening, I think it was about 2015 or 2016, he started getting recurring pneumonia. I think it was called aspiration pneumonia, which is where the food particles were getting into his lungs instead of his stomach and constantly causing this pneumonia. But for the longest time, we didn't understand what was happening. And so at a certain point, he had one of those, they call it TPN. It's a liquid bag of food that goes in through a port, and that's how he was getting his food, and he could only whisper. And at this point, we had become like Siamese twins. We used to joke about how, you know how a mother knows her child's cry, so she knows if the baby is hungry or needs a diaper change, and I just learned what he needed. I remember his daughter one time said, when people ask me why you're the one for my dad, I tell them it's because you two communicate without words. And he could just look at me from across the room and I would know that he needed, you know, a bite of Jell-O or a rag for his fevered forehead. And so it was the best of times and the worst of times, because it was awful and traumatic and also incredibly loving and close. And so right before he died, he did this thing that he had often done through our relationship where he patted the seat next to him, which I knew meant to come sit next to him, and he was gonna gaze into my eyes and talk directly about whatever important thing was on his mind. He's a very thoughtful man. And he said, I want you to imagine there's an angel in the sky, a male angel, and he's been playing his stand-up harp for eternity, for his love, for his angel across the cloud. And he just knows he's going to be happy for eternity with his angel and his music. And one day, the strings on his harp break. And he falls into a deep depression because he knows that his angel is going to leave and find somebody else who can play music for her. And he's going to be in this depression and be alone without his love and without music for the rest of his life. And he says, but then, come to find out, the angel loves him even more without his music. She loves him through his loss and through his grief and she shows him that he's worthy of being loved without his music. And he said, I had this conversation recorded and it still makes me emotional. He said, "That's what you've done for me. I spent my whole life thinking that I was only worthy of being loved because of my voice. And I always said that I was going to play rock and roll until my last breath, and they were going to have to pull me off stage when I keeled over at the organ. And I thought that having my voice, you know, understand he's whispering all of this." He says, it turns out that what I thought was my worst loss was actually a strange gift from God to show me that I was worthy of being loved without my voice. So that's a little insight into the end of his life and our love and just the tender, sensitive, thoughtful poet that he was. Thank you for listening.